Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from around the world. Welcome back to Creation Conversations. And yes, you've probably noticed we're without a John. John is on the road, isn't he?
He's somewhere on the road in Australia, yes.
Probably in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's
And
a lot of that in Australia.
Yeah, it's not just you. We've had very little contact with him, and I was really hoping that he'd be able to come on live for our first Creation Research Centre Open Day tomorrow, but he's not able to join us then either. But he sent us through a video to watch, the same presentation he was going to do. So if you are joining us tomorrow at the Creation Research Centre, you'll be able to see that, and it will be recorded and it will go up on YouTube eventually. But more about that later. We're here, of course, we've got Diane here from Australia. You're here in the UK and still here for a little while longer.
That's right.
So that's great. And we've got Sam, of course, and we've got Craig. How are we doing, guys?
I'm tickety boo.
Good.
Yeah,
How
you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it's good. Yeah, it's we've got a great topic tonight. We're dealing with vestigial organs, which was actually something we've recently just come back from a ministry trip, haven't we?
Yes.
Together, and it was a topic that came up then. And as we were sort of chatting and discussing, we thought that'd be a great thing to do for Creation Conversations. So here we are at Creation Conversations doing vestigial organs, and it's great because it's very biological oriented type of topic, and of course we have Diane as our medical biologist here sort of to discuss this, but let's sort of do our standard sort of run through, give you a bit of a ministry update, tell you what's been going on in the background here at Creation Research. It might well be a slightly shorter presentation tonight, discussion broadcast tonight, just simply because, well, last night I was up until sort of 2:30 in the morning doing stuff with Standing for Truth, and then we've been working flat out today, haven't we, Diane, trying to get everything prepared, and then into the evening as well. So we've got to be up bright and early tomorrow for our open day, which we're actually holding here in the Creation Research Centre. Now, I have to admit, a week ago, Monday, we were traveling back, weren't we, from our ministry trip, and we arrived back here. Tuesday we came in, and I thought we're probably not going to get very much done.
Yes, it did look like a hopeless case.
It really did. It was just an absolute tip, and there was stuff just everywhere. And basically, we got the building, and we had to get out of our previous building by a certain time, and so we literally just had to transfer everything and dump it in. I thought, there's no way this is going to be ready for an open day. I don't know what I was thinking, but the Lord provided. He provided abundantly, not just with volunteers, but also with strength. And so we're now sitting here looking at a very reasonable Creation Research Museum.
Yeah. Oh, it looks wonderful.
It's pretty good.
Yes.
So if you want to have a little sneak peek of upstairs, you need to go and watch the Standing for Truth program, which John and I did last night on polystrate trees, because I actually broadcast that from upstairs. However, today we've had to get all the chairs out and get prepared for the open day. So we're currently broadcasting from the downstairs part, and you can probably see behind us we've got a couple of pretty spectacular fossils. Now, Diane, if we can stand up for just a second, because I'd like to give everybody a quick little sneak peek.
Worth seeing these fossils.
If I can give you the microphone there, Diane,
yes.
you've got that. Why don't you just, as I move the camera around, why don't you just tell us a little bit about what we're looking at and a bit about some of the evidence that we're looking at as well? Because what have we been doing filming-wise over the last few days?
Well, we've filmed some of the more interesting fossils. Well, they're all interesting, but we've filmed some of the more spectacular ones in terms of their size or of their significance to biblical history. So behind us here, we've got some of the spectacular ones in terms of size. So which one are we going to look at first? Oh, that's a good one. Yes, that's actually quite a rare fossil. We're very privileged to have that one. It's a slab of rock with a pterodactyl footprint in it.
Which is one of those big
big flying pterosaur or big flying dinosaur. They're not really dinosaurs, but yes, extinct flying reptiles. And what have we got down here? We have a stalactite, Now it's upside down because they weigh a ton. They really do. So it's not really feasible to have them hanging from your normal ceiling inside a building. So it's sitting here on the floor. But at Creation Research, of course, we've done interesting research on stalactites. And then what have we got over here? We've got some lovely fish from the Green River, a whole lot of them all together there. Beautiful fine detail in those. If you come here, come and have a look at them, see all of the fine detail. Now, these are considered to be evidence that fish was sort of slowly and gradually buried, but you don't have to look at this fossil too closely to see that that's nonsense, because there's just so much fine detail. They had to be buried quickly in order to be preserved. And there are masses and masses of them. That's just one piece of millions of them in that same formation. Now, here are some of our most spectacular fossils. This is a slab of crinoids or sea lilies. And this is not only a good example of rapid formation, it's also a good example of after their kind, because sea lilies still grow on the ocean floor today. They're not a plant, in spite of their name. They're an animal, a bit like a starfish, except that they are attached to the sea floor. So magnificent slab of crinoids or sea lilies. And then over here, we have them.
Just about see it.
Almost see it, yes. An absolutely wonderful slab of Orthoceras. These are extinct creatures again. They're sort of like an ammonite, except that they're straight. So imagine an unrolled ammonite.
Just about see there's a great big one.
There's a great big one there down on the floor. And the other interesting thing about that, in the big slab, they're all pointing in the same direction. So this is a lovely example of a buried flowing structure where you've got a whole lot of elongated living things. And this happens with inanimate objects as well, where you've got flowing water. They will all line up in that general direction. So lots of wonderful examples of creation, of Noah's flood, of rapid burial. So do come and have a look at these things if you have the opportunity.
And Diane, just another mention. Also, one of the things that we are I'm going to do is selfie stick style. There we are. One of the things that we've been trying to do here is not just put these fossils and things on display, but also actually provide a facility for Christians, a centre for Christians. And we have a big shop here, Diane.
Yes, we have a wonderful shop full of fascinating things. It's almost a museum in itself.
And just behind us here, you can actually see a couple of our T-shirts. Now, I actually suggested one of these designs for Creation Research, and they went off and produced them themselves. Tell us a bit about these, Diane.
Yes, this is a play on the classic human evolution icon with the sequence of ape to people. Well, we've sort of literally turned that around and made the point we're not related to apes. Human beings are unique creations, and there's no connection between us and the apes or other animals. God created man in his own image, Genesis 1:27.
Very good. Let's put this camera back, Diane, and get you sitting back out, because we'll move on. There we go.
Right.
There we are. That looks about right. It needs to come back.
No, you cut off your face there, Joe.
There we are. That's a little bit better.
Yes, there we go.
So there we go. A quick little tour around the museum. And like I said, the whole idea of this museum is that it's a place that is a facility. It's a place to facilitate discipleship, really, as we were discussing with Randall, one of our long-term workers. And it's a place which is not just to be an evangelistic opportunity. So we are going to pray that everybody who comes into this building gets the gospel, who isn't a Christian, and there's been a lot of interest locally in this as well, hasn't there? So that's really good. You always get people.
We've had a constant stream of people passing down the laneway down the front there. And people have come in. Someone wanted to buy one of our dinosaurs. They've been fascinated just by what's going on. So
just out of curiosity, how much did they offer for the dinosaur, or did you not? They
asked us to name the price. So they were like, "How much do you want?" And yeah, well,
$1
10 million.
million.
exactly. Yeah. So yeah, it's we didn't sell the dinosaur.
Yes, but anyway, it's generated local interest, so
It
that's
really
a good
has.
thing.
It's been really good. And so we're going to be, Lord willing, a facility for people, obviously not just for an evangelistic opportunity, but also so that we can facilitate interns and research and studies and apologetics and all this kind of stuff as well. So it's the Lord is really doing some good work here. So praise him for that, and continue to support us in all that we do. Come, if you're coming tomorrow, then it'll be great to see you. But also moving forward, we will certainly be able to open the museum to people who want to book to come in and do stuff. So if you are in the area, then get in touch, because I'm sure we'll be able to arrange a special opening just for you. But also what we'll eventually get onto, Lord willing, by the new year, is specific times a week that we are open for people to come in and see and walk around and do stuff. So we're looking forward to seeing what plans that the Lord has for us.
See what the Lord brings about.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, we've had lots and lots of workers come and volunteers come and help us at the museum over the last week or so. It's been really, really very wonderful and really encouraging, which has been fantastic. However, something that has happened since then is that one of our trustees, David, has been around. Now, David lived in Germany for a very long time, and John Mackay would go out to Germany and stay with them and go and do digs at places like the Solnhofen and the Molhain. Which, tell us a little bit about that, Diane, because I know you've looked into the history of the words behind it. I mean, these are the Jurassic rocks.
These are the Jurassic rocks. They're limestone rocks. And they have some spectacular fossils in them, and some quite famous ones, including Archaeopteryx.
It's named after the Jura Mountains as well, which is in Germany. And so David bought me a wonderful box, a big present box, which was all packaged up and taped up. And he said, John left this years ago, the last time he was here. He packaged it all up to ship back, but he never shipped it. So I was like, all right, okay, we'll have that. Opened it up, had some of John's clothes in it, which... There we are. Lots of DVDs and a few books and stuff like that, and the odd fossil tool and whatnot. And then this rather spectacular fossil. It was worth digging through John's underwear for. Have a look at this. See if we can get it up into the light. There we go. You can see that. Yes. Right. So, Diane, let's get the right way around. So we've got a fossil here. Just up here, and we've got a fossil on this side. So this fossil here is an ammonite. Yes, that's right. It's one of those curly-whirly creatures now extinct. Yes. And this fossil here, this is rather interesting, and you probably know what this is because it comes from where, well, it's still alive today, isn't it, in Australia? Yes, that's right. It's a southern pine tree. Now, southern means that these things only grow these days in the southern hemisphere. Now, Germany is definitely not in the southern hemisphere. So something has changed in the past. So southern pine trees no longer grow in Germany, but it's exactly the same as the southern pine trees that still grow in Australia now. So we have a lovely example of after their kind, and also of degeneration in the world. In other words, loss of biodiversity and loss of habitat. So it's evidence of creation, it's evidence of after their kind, it's evidence of climate change because of Noah's flood, but also you notice we've got a land plant buried next to a deep sea creature. And so not only are you looking at evidence of after their kind and creation, you're also looking at evidence of, well, rapid deposition for sure, but also flooding, specifically flooding, because you do have things like plants and deep sea creatures, land plants, sea animals mixed and buried together. So definite evidence of flooding. Yes. So there we are. Well, John, you should have taken it while you had the chance, because this is now mine. So
Joe, just a quick observation, just on that fossil, the tree segment there. Can you? Is it possible to actually see potential for where the water was flowing by the direction of the leaves? The branch
you can
thing.
also see that underneath you've also got other fragments of plant that are kind of pointing in that direction. So you're certainly looking at evidence of flowing water in there as well. You've got some more on the back which are pointing pretty much the same way. So you're definitely looking at evidence of flowing water, and that's not been stained, has it, Diane?
No,
That's how it comes
that's
out.
as it came.
So
yes.
it's pretty spectacular. Yeah, there we are. Great piece of evidence. Really lovely.
Well, sorry, John, you lost your dibs on that.
Yeah, it's here now. It's going on display. It would be mounted
Yes.
behind us, but we've been a little bit tight on the time front, and you probably noticed we've got lots of fossils on the floor, which will all eventually end up being mounted. I'm hoping we can get that stalactite mounted, but I'm not convinced. We'll have to wait and see about that. But there we are. You'll find a lot of we've got 2 huge pieces of stalactite, one behind, but one that's probably 5 times bigger. That big one over there, Diane, which is just, there's no way we're going to ever get that
you need a crane
suspended.
to move that
It is a bit ridiculous. Yeah.
How did you get it in here?
Yeah, well, it was lots of
It
strong
was there
men.
when I.
Yeah. Well, the funniest thing is we had to go and pick that up from London. So it took 4 of us to get it lying down on cushions and slid into the car. And the poor car protested all the way back here from London via Norfolk, but that's a different story. And then when we finally managed to get it up a grass bank into our previous building, and basically we purpose built a cradle for it to get it over here. Thankfully, we had a Luton van, which we didn't have the previous 3 ships, so we got it eventually. Anyway, let's move on.
Joe, did you get my picture of a real Araucaria forest that I sent you?
Indeed, yes. Yeah. I haven't got it up at hand, but yeah, it was really that was a
Beautiful forest.
It's beautiful forest. But Craig, why don't you give us your little bit? Give us a bit of an update as to what you've been doing, and also what you've got a little report about the patterns of evidence, the Hebrew writing and stuff.
Yeah, well, I didn't really want to show you my puny fossil after seeing your magnificent ones, but
that's fine.
I did
All fossils are welcome.
Yeah, well, I did go to a new site, for me at least, Poatina in sort of central Tasmania, at the base of the mountains in the Central Highlands in Tasmania. Found this brachiopod. It's a really nice one, nicely intact one, and another bigger shell fossil, if you get the idea of it there.
Oh yes, that's nice.
A nice couple there. So that was a bit of fun. I should have been playing cricket, but it was washed out. Been lots of flooding still happening down here. In fact, half the mountain fell away in one place and has cut off the main road there. There's boulders as big as buses that have come down and are sitting on the road. It's quite incredible, actually, the movement of soil and dirt as a result of these landslides. Been incredible. But yeah, that was one little thing I've done. You might notice I've got a new camera. It's wide angle, which is I didn't realise it was going to be a bit of a problem. I have to actually tidy my room up more now.
You see, it's something you'll have to learn, because where I am, in my room, I've got the camera angled in such a way you can't see the mess in my room. So it looks really tidy from here, so I've got my work computer on the desk all lovely and sort of minimalist there. I've got my chair, I've got the plain wall. No. It's just mess everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that looks like I've sort of got a real library of important books there, but I've got my Phantom comics and other things really stacked up in there. So,
I know. We
anyway,
had a discussion about that before we started. Oh, goodness me!
You should do what John does, and he hides the mess with 2 great big banners. I've seen behind those banners.
Yeah, well, that's what I think I'll have to do. But anyway, it's good to be here. Just one thing I thought I'd bring up, if you want me to do that now.
Yeah,
Joe,
go for it.
Just watching, some of our viewers would have seen the patterns of evidence videos by the investigative filmmaker Timothy Mahoney, and really great films. I haven't seen all of them yet, but the one on the Moses controversy, which I wasn't really that familiar with, that a lot of secular sort of biblical history experts from the universities claimed that Moses couldn't have possibly written Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, etc., because there was actually no form of Hebrew writing in those times, and that in fact the earliest Hebrew writings were about 900 BC, certainly no older than the first millennium BC. Where Timothy Mahoney interviews these guys. It's one of the things that he does great is he goes to the critics as well and interviews them and sees what they say. But he really puts a good story together about how it is possible that there was some sort of early Hebrew, rather than Hebrew coming out of Phoenician, Hebrew writing coming out of Phoenician, that the earliest Hebrew might have been actually the forerunner of Phoenician as a written language. And that was his proposition. So the video was made about 2019, and yet this year it's been basically confirmed in 2022, March 2022, there was a press release and media sort of show by the Associates for Biblical Research, Dr. Scott Stripling, basically proving the Bible to be true, as is always the case. The evidence out there presented by the secular experts is that this couldn't possibly be true. But for those of us who believe the Bible, we see this happen time and time again, that the Bible is proven indeed to be true. And I might just diverge for a minute. When John and I were taking on the Atheist Foundation of Australia in a debate way back in 2006, I was liaising with the president of the Atheist Foundation of Australia, trying to organise the debate, and he was very, very aggressive, actually. And just in the phone call, he's raised up, do you know, there's no archaeological evidence that Nazareth even existed as a town in the time of Jesus in the 1st century AD. And I hadn't heard this before, so I went and investigated it. And in fact, that's true. Not that I think that's any evidence at all that the Bible isn't true, but I went and investigated it, and indeed it was true. There was no archaeological evidence at all that Nazareth existed as a town in 2006. However, in 2009, Israeli archaeologists found a 1st century dwelling right in the centre of Nazareth, proving again that the scriptures are true. And I found that quite exciting, and it's something that happens over and over again. So Dr. Stripling's work was based around Mount Ebal, which is mentioned in Joshua, about Joshua 8, I think it is, where they constructed an altar on Mount Ebal and one on the adjacent mountain, Mount Gerizim. So the altars and the mountains of blessing and the mountain of cursing, and this was the mountain of cursing. And in the 1980s, a couple of altars were uncovered by archaeologists, and new techniques allowed Stripling's team to go in and rework the material that had been dug up in the previous excavations, a method called wet sifting. And they used this method, and in it they uncovered a lead tablet. And on this lead tablet, there's what they call proto-alphabetic script, and it's a form of Hebrew, and it's the earliest form of Hebrew inscription ever found in Israel. In fact, Stripling said that it is the most important inscription ever found in Israel. And it proves, because it's from the late Bronze Age 2, late Bronze 2 period, they call it, which is between 1200 and 1400 BC. So it's hundreds of years earlier than any other form of Hebrew inscription. And it's in this lead, and it's probably a good thing that the early archaeologists didn't find it, because they had no... they might have destroyed it trying to read it, but there's this new system of finding it, the wet sifting found it, but there's also a new way of scanning lead tablets called tomographic scanning, and they've found this to include very, very early Hebrew writing, and it's basically verifying that Joshua and people of that time, and Joshua, of course, was Moses's offsider, so if he could write, there's no question that Moses could write as well. So it's a very exciting find. And one question that was presented at the media conference was, how would you rate this as evidence of synchronization between the biblical text and archaeological evidence? And Scott Stripling's his response was, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, this is a 10. This is as good as it gets in terms of verifying the biblical text with actual historical artifacts. So I found it really exciting to watch. It was great to see this story by Mahoney from a couple of years ago being completely verified now with the archaeological evidence in Israel. The use of, sorry, mate. Yep.
No, I was just going to say I've seen the documentary, and it's so fascinating. It is genuinely, like, I was watching, I was just like, whoa, this is so cool. Like, and then you obviously you watch the documentary, and you have it, but it's not just the one side that's put forward; it's both. Both of them are put forward. You have both the secular historians and the more sort of out there Christian historians, and they're put forward arguments, and you have the evidence, and then it shows it doesn't necessarily point to the right answer, but it shows the implications of each sort of side of the argument, and it's very persuasive on the Christian side that proves that the dating system that is currently in to do with Egypt is wrong. But carry on, Craig.
No, absolutely. Well, I'm nearly done anyway, but it happens over and over again. In fact, the last couple of years have been very exciting for archaeological research in Israel. They've uncovered Hezekiah's tunnel. They've made some great finds in the city of David and in Jerusalem there. And there's just been some fantastic stuff verifying scripture over and over again. And just regarding just a point of interest, I've got Job 19, verse 24 says, "Oh, that my words were written, oh, that they were written on a scroll, that they were inscribed with an iron tool on lead or engraved in rock forever." So here's the earliest book in the Bible mentioning inscriptions in lead with an iron tool. And that's basically what they found there at Mount Ebal. So really exciting stuff.
Ooh,
it's fantastic, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. It's amazing when you see how it all sort of
Yes.
begins to line up,
That's-
and we shouldn't really be surprised, but it's it's great when you start seeing evidence for it.
Yeah.
People can go and do a search for this, by the way. If you just search, Hebrew inscriptions, Mount Ebal or something like that online, you'll find probably even the press release and so on. It's quite interesting to watch.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic.
Can I just add on to that just a few sort of bits and pieces to do with archaeology and things like that? Some really great resources. So this is the CSB Apologetic Study Bible. As you can I'll put myself full screen because you'll probably want to see this. I'll be quick, I promise. Apologetic Study Bible. It's got some great articles in here, including there's some bits at the back which show. So this is select important Old Testament archaeological finds, and as well it has select important New Testament archaeological finds there. It's got the dates of when they were found, where they were found, and what it relates to in scripture. That's a really great resource. Another great resource as well is this one. I've blagged this before, but Jerusalem as Jesus Knew It. This is by John Wilkinson. It's got great. It's great. Goes really in depth. It's got coins. It's got archaeological sort of artifacts and old ruins and things like that in there. And of course, it's not a creation research stream without blagging a few of our items, which you'll probably be able to pick up in our new shop tomorrow.
Yes.
If you're coming. So first up, we've got Tights, Mites and Fossil Fights. It's a young world after. Oh no, I better not sing that, otherwise the mouse will come after me. But there you go. This is the updated version.
Stop it,
So
Sam.
Yeah. And then it's coming up to Christmas, so always a good chance to flog Itzhak the Star Boy.
Yes.
We have a limited amount of them in the UK, so you need to get them now.
Get them now while you can. It's a brilliant comic. It's full color, lovely, brilliant story inside. And then this one, I don't know if we have any stock of this in the UK, but if you can get a hold of it, this is fantastic. Untold Secrets of Planet Earth Dire Dragons, with one of my favorite dinosaurs on there. This is Dracorex. Full name is Dracorex Hogwartsia.
Yeah, Hogwartsia, which tells you what paleontologists read in their spare time.
But no, this is fantastic. If you want to see evidence of humans and dinosaurs coexisting, you just need to sort of just flip to any page here, and you've just got beautiful full color illustrations, including this one over here, which shows really great pictures.
And the thing is, these are all pictures of real artifacts, which Vance has been and seen and taken himself. So there's really a huge amount of data, huge amount of evidence.
Yes, I was actually there when he took the photos of the ones in Carlisle Cathedral.
Yeah.
Pretty spectacular.
We've got a few DVDs as well. This is the one that started it all for me, Darwin's Evolution, Very Unnatural Selection. And then that goes into Darwin on the Rocks. There you go. And then we've also got the follow-up to that one. It's a trilogy, Time's Up Darwin. So those are great DVDs. And of course, Joe's documentary, Fire and Ice. There you go.
That's a great one, Joe.
Yeah, it's really good, that one.
Thank you.
Did a cracking job. Sarah Ann, the Sacrifice and the Honeymoon was well worth it.
Well, yeah.
And then, of course, we've got our Rocks Cry Out series. I don't have all 4 to hand, but there you go. That's one of them. So if you're going out in the UK, you can't make it to the museum, you can take Creation Research with you to the beach. You can guide you through. Almost done. Walking through Jesus with walking through. I'm really messing up.
I keep saying that. Walking through Jesus.
Walking with Jesus through Genesis. This is a fantastic resource if you want to do a little bit of Bible study. I noticed there was someone in the chat earlier who was looking to do some Bible study. You can get this resource. This is great. This is volume 1.
Really good.
We have a new one coming out in the near future.
Yes, in the near future. We've actually got about 5 to 6 different books, which we will be printing in the UK over the next couple of weeks. And so there'll be plenty of other things available very, very soon, including a new one of those. We've got 2 new kids books, which are going to be printed shortly. We've got the new edition of Tights and Mites. I want to get some of the archaeological stuff printed as well, some of John Osgood's archaeological stuff, because they are fantastic. And also, Diane, we've been in the role of sort of the discussions with the DVDs and stuff, where not only in the middle of producing a whole series really with multiple episodes of around the museum, but we're also working on a new documentary. What's that about?
That's about poisons and venoms and how they fit into the Bible. And
we've got some on-location shots. We're going to have some live animal shots. We've got some interviews with you and with John and so on and so forth. So it's that's starting to shape up really nicely as well now. So that's fantastic. But
how's the documentary? The global warning.
Global warning, that's been shelved slightly for the moment for a number of reasons. We've got a few participants who are willing to participate, scientists and people, discussions and so on and so forth. But we really wanted to focus in on the politics, and the politics is ticking around in the background. The problem is, at the moment, for the last few months, politics in the UK have been decidedly elsewhere. Than on the climate change things. So there have been a number of rebellion protesters doing various things like throwing soup at Van Gogh and stuff like that, or his paintings anyway. But we wanted to kind of hit the politics, so everything's been a bit, and everything with all the stuff that's going on with the museum, traveling to film people and interview people has just been virtually impossible. So it's still in the works, but it has been shelved for the time being. But as we have Diane here, we thought we might as well crack on and do some something that's a little bit more realistic to to make.
What's Sam's story with Darwin's evolution kicking things off? You said, Sam.
Oh, it was the first thing the first because it's probably a little naughty of me, but I got I bought the DVD. I did buy it. Okay, I didn't steal it. I bought the DVD. It was when John came to a church in York where I grew up, and I bought that one, and it was the trilogy. Actually, I got all three because I think Time's Up Darwin had just come out, I believe. So I got
that was the last one. Yes.
Yeah, and I had a program on my computer where I could take the film and take the footage off and put it on my iPod. So I remember on my iPod Nano, there's this sort of like this third generation, really tiny screen, just staring intently at the documentary. Is great. And it would pass many an hour on a car journey and things like that, which is it was great. That's sort of what sort of I had VHS tapes of Dinosaurs, the Rest of the Tale, and things like that. But that was the sort of I only watched that really for the dinosaurs. I was too young to really comprehend the intricate details of science behind it. But that was sort of my sort of kickstart into really thinking about it. But I will just put myself back full screen because I've got the last bit here, because I know, Joe, you did mention these, so I will blag them a little bit. Oh gosh, there's paper everywhere. So we've got John Osgood's books here, little books here. There's Egypt, Israel, and the Exodus. The evidence is real. And then we've also got Times of Abraham and the Philistines. And we've also got as well a book by Bill Cooper called After the Flood as well. That's a good read. And another book by Bill Cooper, The Authenticity of the Book of Genesis. This one's a bit of a chunky one. There you go. And then the last one, bring it back to Creation Research Books. Your questions about creation answered. I know we had a Q&A last week. I should have blagged this, but we got all caught up in questions that I completely forgot. So there you go. That's me done. We can now move on.
Great stuff. Well, Sam, why don't we have just one or two quick questions, if there's anything that's come into the chat over the last little while, just before we move into our main topic for tonight, because I think we've covered just about everything else. So we'll do the main topic, which Diane will be dealing with, and then we'll deal with a few questions before we close down. We're going to have a slightly shorter creation conversations tonight for those who are watching and have just tuned in, maybe sort of just over an hour and 20, something like that. But let's have a one or two questions, Sam, if anything's come in. And if there are any thank yous, I'm not sure if there have been any thank yous yet.
No thank yous so far. No thank yous. Oh, here we go. We've got questions rolling in hot off the press. Here we go. I've got three in back. I've got three loaded up here. So this one comes in from Doki Doki. This relates to yesterday on Standing for Truth. It says, what do you think about pretty much all the critics in the chat during yesterday's presentation having no problem granting a flood to explain polystrate trees?
Well, since I was the only one out of the four of us who was there yesterday, and I was sort of co-presenter with John, I better answer. So it's something that is fairly typical among secular scientists. They will admit that the processes behind what we're promoting are correct up to a point. So you'll find that there's no way, if you accept that these polystrate trees are real, which is a hurdle you have to overcome first and foremost, because they have had a history of denying their existence. But once you accept their existence, there's very little else to do than accept that it was formed by some kind of overwhelming flooding, being overwhelmed by flooding and being buried in some kind of a flood environment, right? And they're very happy to go into that point, to say that point, but it essentially stops there, right? Because they'll say, well, this was clearly a local flood. And one of the critics who was posting stuff last night posted up a paper that I've come across before, which was to do with the Hudson River, right? And they argue that during various tidal bores, you end up with layers of sedimentation anywhere between 4 to 18 centimeters thick, right? And the argument is that, well, if a tidal bore can do this, then you can have sediments being formed very quickly. Of course, even that, in the case of 1 to 2 times a year, is not really that rapid. When you're dealing with something that, some of these trees are 25 meters long, that's a lot of tidal bores, right? And also the prevailing claim is that these trees lived there, died there, buried there, which is nonsense. Even if they do have such a thing as like a root bulb or even some roots, you can clearly see where they've been ripped off, and they're sitting in no soil. In fact, quite often they're sitting on top of a coal seam, which is not an environment which a tree could grow in, full stop. So you'll find that their evidence is abundant for them being flooded into place, ripped up, torn, transported, but the argument stops at it being a local flood. That's why it's so important that you step backwards and take in the big picture and say, well, look, these, carboniferous trees are identical, with identical fossils in identical, positions, whether you're in Tennessee, whether you're in Canada, whether you're in the UK, whether you're in Australia, right? They're all the same thing, no matter where you go. And it was amazing how many of the questions and the comments came out of ignorance. There is really no other way of saying it. There's no nice way of saying it. You had comments come up with things like, well, if there was a global flood, surely these polystrate trees would be found all over the world. They are. That's what the entire premise of our talk was about, right? The number of polystrate trees. But you see, it's not just that. As the chat kind of dived off into various realms, as it often does, you even had we never got onto the discussion with on standing for trees, because the topic was, of course, polystrate trees and polystrate fossils. But something that came up again was Neanderthal, right? And somebody was arguing that the Neanderthal genome is significantly different from the human genome, and that they're a distinct species. And of course, not only were they out of date, it was a question from ignorance, as I know that you've pointed out, Diane, as we've been discussing. There's no such thing as a Neanderthal genome. It's a human genome with a Neanderthal variant. So it's like, and even secular science has cottoned on this, because they've been redefined as Homo sapiens, so they are regarded as human beings now, even in the secular literature. So it's generally, you'll find that these things are questions out of ignorance, and the having no problem granting a flood to explain them is because that's the only explanation. It's the only reasonable logic explanation. It's the clear explanation when you actually look at the evidence. It's just that they have to stop short of a global flood, because that's a bit too Bible-like.
Yes, that's right.
Especially when, and if you go, the natural question to lead on from that is, well, why are they so against a global flood? And the answer is simple. The heart of man is desperately wicked, and the heart of man will do everything that it possibly can to get rid of God out of its life. And so if you have a global flood, well, there's only one record of a global flood in history and scripture, right? What was it? What was the cause of it? It was God's judgment. Now, if there's a God who judged in the past and wiped out all life on earth except for Noah and those in the ark he found grace in, right? There's probably still a God who can judge there today, and he's probably promised that he will judge again, and he probably has a few rules that we ought to follow. So it's really a rejection of God, a rebellion against God, whether it's a conscious decision or not.
And it undermines their long age uniformitarian processes, which is the foundation of their millions of years.
Yeah, and it's really the evidence is so abundantly clear. I think one of the quips we do on one of our DVDs, I think it's the Monkeys Don't Cry one. It's like, the evidence, the differences between apes and monkeys and humans is so great that you have to be trained in university for many years to miss them. But it's the same principle. Yeah, there it is, Sam. It's the same principle with most things, right? The evidence of a global flood is so abundantly overwhelming. You have to be trained through children's television and primary
Yes.
school and middle school and high school and college and university, and by the end of all of that, you just have no ability to be able to see the evidence. You've been so you know, so pushed away from it. So yeah, it's sad, but it's kind of to be expected.
Yes, that's right.
Let's have one more question, Sam, before we move on, and I'll hand over to Diane.
Okay. Well, first of all, we have some thanks that have come in.
Oh,
look at that.
lovely.
We ask and we shall receive. There we
Indeed.
go. So there we go. Doki Doki, as usual, coming in with the 199 US Buckaroos, a director's chair with the words "on set" written on it. There you go. And Sandy C, God bless you. 20 New Zealand Buckaroos with a smiley emoji going.
Oh, that's nice.
There you go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Right. Okay. Let's have a look at this question here. This comes in from Sandy. So Sandy says, evolutionists say the oil companies use radiometric dating to find the oil. Is that true?
Partially true. In one sense, you got to bear in mind that oil is often found in depends on where you find your oil. Oil is often found in fossil bearing rock. It's in sedimentary rock, right? And ultimately, there's no way of actually radiometric dating that because you have to radiometric date igneous rock, which is volcanic rock, and so you only really get volcanic rock that comes up in dikes, right? Which is where igneous rock has protruded or extruded through the sedimentary rock. And so the argument is that you can use these protrusions or extrusions to be able to work out where you have hidden basins to find the oil, right? The reality is you don't use that very often. If you speak to actual oil geologists, and there are a number of them in creation research, and we've got one guy who's an oil geologist in the States. We've got a good friend of mine who was an oil geologist in the UK, and in fact he actually was at our convention and spoke at our convention. And the first time I met him and I asked him sort of what he did, he said, well, basically I was in charge of working out where a 20 million pound oil rig would go, and it was on my head if I got it wrong, kind of thing, and he never used a single fossils falling over. He never used a single radiometric method to be able to work out where to go. So really it's only used on a large scale basis to have an indication of where oil deposits may or may not be found. Now that's just an indication of location. It's not an indication necessarily of time, because you're using it to essentially look for the higher radioactive elements and which can force the oil to kind of congregate around it. So it's not actually that much to do with dating. It's more to do with the radioactive levels. But if you're dealing with stuff like, for instance, the controversial topic that is fracking here in the UK, and it's used in the States and I don't know, possibly Australia. I don't know, is fracking a thing in Australia?
There are people for it and against it.
Yeah,
so
okay, it's the same as anywhere.
Topic,
yeah, it's a hot topic.
Yes,
but
yes.
in those cases, you'd never bother using radiometric dating because, number one, you couldn't in most cases. Number two, it's something that's observable. So really a good knowledge of geology and a good knowledge of structural geology is probably a far more useful skill than using radiometric dating. Anyway, Diane, let's move the computer over to you and the microphone and all of that. Let's get that in front of you there. And so that's there. Let's move the microphone here. Now, before we dive into your presentation, give us a shot of this. What's this that we're talking about tonight? In fact, we've discussed this quite a lot this week.
Yes, we have actually. This is a human spine.
And this is a real one?
It is a real one, and in case anyone is wondering, there are certain circumstances where you are allowed to have real human bones in scientific and medical purposes, and so these have been acquired legally.
Yeah, this is actually a medical specimen. You can see how it's all been strung together.
That's right. And we're going to have a look at one of the so-called vestigial organs, which is this thing down here. sometimes referred to as the tailbone. Its proper name is the coccyx. I'll explain a little bit more about this with the slideshow. But yes, it's considered to be one of the classic vestigial organs, and that's what we're going to have a look at
this evening. So this is actually one of the things that's on display here at the Creation Research Centre. But Diane, let's get your slides up and running, and then it's over to you as you take us through discussions of vestigial organs.
Yes, well, if you get our newsletter, you would have received this story from the recent scientific news. In fact, it was just last week's main story in the journal called Science. And of course, once reports get sent out in the scientific journals, journalists then pick these up. And also the universities that publish them put out press releases. And a common term in the various press releases to do with this particular story was the term junk DNA. And here are some of the headlines that were in some of the news stories. Butterfly wing patterns emerge from ancient junk DNA. And that was from Cornell University's own press release. That was their headline. Now, Science Daily is a website that actually picks up on these press releases. We find it a very useful source of our stories. And then again, another one similar, SciTech Daily. Slight variation of that headline: gene-edited butterfly mutants reveal sequence of ancient junk DNA. Now, that is a term that should have been put in the bin a long time ago, and in fact, in the professional literature, it certainly has, because it comes from the idea that in our DNA we are carrying around a whole lot of evolutionary leftovers, bits of DNA that we've inherited from our evolutionary forebears. Now, again, this idea has been debunked when some real science has been applied to this supposed junk DNA. And as the genome revolution has gone on, we've had more and more evidence for creation, more and more evidence for that the Bible is true. It's just like in the archaeology, right? Stand your ground. Eventually the science and the scientists will catch up. And so this is what was reported in the actual original science scientific journal, right? Science is the name of the journal. And in the science editor's summary, we have this term: deeply conserved non-coding DNA. Now, that's a bit of a movement away from junk DNA. It's not quite as condemnatory, as it were. It's not condemning this, but it's still implying that somehow this is not really useful DNA. But in fact, it's exceedingly useful DNA, and that was the whole point of this report. And so the scientists who did this experiment, looking at butterfly wing patterns and how they're organized, called them what they should be called: regulatory elements. In other words, parts of the DNA that actually regulate or control the main genes. And one of the most important things we have discovered in the genome revolution is that it is not enough just to have the actual genes for proteins and body structures and body tissues. They have to be turned on and off at the right time. They have to be turned to the right sort of level. So there are all these control genes or regulatory elements which are not non-coding, because they actually contain a lot of information. So non-coding is also an equally false term. They are regulatory elements or control genes. So why do the science journalists persist in using junk DNA? Well, it maintains the theory of evolution, of course, because that's the mindset that they have. We're all carrying around all of this stuff from millions of years of evolution. And I also wonder whether they don't really like the idea of regulatory elements, because it does imply that there is a regulator somewhere. In other words, someone who's outside the system, who might be in control, and they're not. If you want to read the details of that report, it's now on our fact file. We archive all of these science items, so just look up Creation Fact File and you will find it there. And at the moment, because it's a news story, there's a nice picture of a butterfly there. But anyway, it does lead into what we want to talk about tonight, which is vestigial organs, because it's the same mindset, whether you're talking about DNA or whether you're talking about entire body structures. Very early on, when evolution was being promoted, this whole concept that we are carrying around remnants of somehow millions of years of evolution. And Darwin himself wrote about this. He didn't use the term vestigial. He referred to them as rudimentary organs. In other words, rudiments or things from the past that no longer are functional in our bodies. And this is an idea that has stuck. Now, partly when scientists did look at the human body, they did find some things that just didn't seem to have much function. They were sort of little knobs of tissue. And we had to wait until the technology developed. So some of the endocrine organs, which just look like little blobs of tissue that don't seem to do anything, in fact, they are actually essential for life. But we had to wait till we had the chemical technology to analyze the secretions that they make. But at the same time, because they got stuck in this mindset of vestigial organs or leftovers from evolution, that term has persisted, even though the original list of these things, I think in about the 1890s, someone put out a list of about 90 of them. That's been whittled down to a few, but they have been particularly persistent, and it's still in the mindset of many people. So we thought we'd have a look at a few of them, a few of the more well-known ones, and look at what's happened when someone has actually done some real investigation into them. So let's start off with that one we've just talked about, the so-called tailbone, which was supposedly a leftover from tailed ancestors. Now, you have to actually go back quite a few steps to get to a tailed ancestor, because apes don't have tails, but monkeys do. And that very last bone, that little triangular bone right at the base of the spine, is commonly called the tailbone. In fact, people who have injured it will sometimes tell you, oh, I fell over and I bruised or broke my tailbone and it was agony. We'll come back to that because that's an important point. Its proper name is the coccyx, and the anatomist who gave it that name thought it looked like a cuckoo's beak. Well, I'll leave that to the bird experts as to how accurate that is in terms of the structure of a cuckoo's beak. But it is a small, curved, triangular structure. And as usual, you never look at anything in the body by itself. You have to look at things in their context. And in fact, the coccyx is an important muscle and ligament anchor point. So if you put it into its context, that basal part of the spine there, that the last part of the spine, the sacrum is the big triangle, and the coccyx is a little triangle hanging off the bottom there. That forms part of the pelvis, which is a ring of bone, and that supports all of your pelvic organs, which perform some exceedingly useful functions. So it's an anchor point for the muscles of the pelvic floor and the ligaments of the pelvic floor. And if anyone has broken or bruised their coccyx, they'll tell you it is absolute agony every time they try to move because of all of those connections. So an essential part of our anatomy that's been known for a long time, but because of this firm belief that we carry around evolutionary leftovers, the term tailbone has stuck. Now, the other classic one, of course, is the appendix, which is part of the digestive system. Now, the digestive system is not quite that colourful, but I didn't think you would really appreciate a true anatomical photo of your various insides. But anyway, the appendix is a small blind-ended pouch that sticks out at the end of the large intestine, now it's the beginning of the large intestine in terms of the flow. So as you flow from the small intestine into the large intestine, the appendix is a bit that sort of hangs off the bottom. So it's near the junction of the small intestine and the large intestine. And this is the sort of popular science that gets published every now and again. This does come from 2005, but it expresses the belief rather well of what people generally think of. In plant-eating vertebrates, the appendix is much larger and its main function is to help digest a large herbivorous diet. Well, that alone is disputed, but anyway. The human appendix is a small pouch attached to the large intestine where it joins the small intestine and does not directly assist digestion. That's true. It doesn't directly assist digestion, but that doesn't mean it's useless. The next sentence, biologists believe it is a vestigial organ left behind from a plant-eating ancestor. Well, that has been challenged by the secular scientists themselves. A few years ago, a group of scientists got together and they did an appendix evolution study, if you like. Now, they really got stuck into this. They did a survey of 361 living mammals, and 50 of these species actually had something that could be described as an appendix. It's not always the same shape as a human appendix, but it definitely fits the description of an appendix. And what they did is they looked at their diet, but they also looked at various other aspects of their lives and their lifestyle and their habits. And they tried to put this into an evolutionary tree of mammals. And they came up with this extraordinary conclusion. No correlation was found between the appearance of an appendix and evolutionary changes in diet, fermentation strategy. In other words, how food is digested, particularly in creatures that are completely vegetarian. They ferment their food within their digestive system. Coprophagia. If you really want to know what that means, it means eating the animal's droppings and reprocessing them. All right, social group size, activity pattern, cecal shape. The cecum is the name of the first part of the large intestine where the small intestine joins on it, or colonic separation mechanism, in other words, how the large intestine works. So there was no correlation between any of those things and the evolutionary changes. In other words, they couldn't fit it into a nice evolutionary tree. So they then decided, well, we can't fit it into an evolutionary pattern. And this is a good example of how evolution is actually an anti-science idea, really. It doesn't help anybody. In fact, it condemns people to not doing science, because if you find something that you don't know what it does, the scientific solution is to do some more research. Well, human curiosity does prevail, and these scientists did that more research. And they came up with this extraordinary conclusion. The appendix has evolved minimally for 32 times. Now, it takes a lot of faith to believe that pure chance random processes are going to produce a complex structure, and the appendix does have a complex structure. It takes a lot of faith to believe that that would just happen by molecules banging into one another. So it seems that the evolutionists have to have 32 times as much faith as the Christians. Anyway, they went on to say these results, together with the immunological and medical evidence, refute some of Darwin's hypotheses. In other words, Darwin's idea that we're all carrying around a whole lot of evolutionary baggage, and suggest that the appendix is adaptive. Now, by adaptive, they mean useful, but it has not evolved as a response to any particular dietary or social factor evaluated here. So it's not because animals changed their diet, they suddenly grew an appendix. So they've really blown this one out of the water 32 times. Right. So, in fact, the appendix is a functional structure, and we should have known that the first time that anyone looked at it underneath a microscope, because they saw that it was full of tissue called lymphoid tissue, and there's a lot of that around the gastrointestinal tract. Because one of the things that we've also learned about fairly recently is this term, the microbiome. We live with a whole lot of bacteria living on our internal body surfaces. You know, these are the so-called good bacteria that the people who sell yogurt and things like that advertise about. And most bacteria are actually good. So we now have our microbiome, but even that has to be kept in its place. So lymphoid tissue is immune tissue. It decides what belongs inside the human body and what doesn't, and what is considered to be enemies and needs to be shot down. In our modern world, of course, or in our fallen world, we have diseases. So if there's any inflammation in the large bowel, the microbiome can be damaged. And it's interesting, the appendix has been found to be a sort of safe house for the good bacteria if there is an inflammatory problem with the large bowel. So a useful functioning structure. Now, here's one that you might not be familiar with that's considered to be a vestigial function, and that's swinging your arms. Now, Joseph, I'm sure you like to go for walks along the beach. You used to live near the coast, didn't you?
Right next to the coast, yeah.
Yes. So I'm sure you walked along the beach many times. And
normally with sort of very bent back looking for fossils. So
that's right, yes, and then carrying them back. But if you were just going for a walk, you just naturally swing your arms. You don't even think about it. Now, of course, you know, soldiers on parade are taught to do that. Yeah. But even if you're just going for a casual walk, it just happens. And because of that, because you don't consciously think about it, it was considered to be an evolutionary leftover from our quadruped ancestors.
Like from when we were like walkers,
that's right. Yeah. When we walked on all fours, so you know we used our arms to walk as well as our legs. Now again, somebody did some real science here. So they did a study which was a bit like I don't know if any of you remember Monty Python. One of their classic sketches was called The Ministry of Silly Walks. Now, that's nothing to do with current British politics.
Wow. I would say
debatable, Diane, debatable.
Yes, well, we might not go there, but anyway. But what they got to do is that they actually studied how much energy you use with different styles of walking. So they got people to deliberately walk, first of all, studying them just how they naturally walk, which meant their arms just, your arms swing, and they swing in opposite direction to your legs. And that just seems to be a natural cycle that you do without thinking of it. Then they got the same people to walk in these sort of silly walks, sort of. One was holding the arms the side, one was arms swinging the same side as your legs. That's actually quite hard to do. You've really got to think about that. And it turned out that the natural arm swinging, in other words, what you do when you're casually going for a walk and your arms just naturally swing without you thinking about it, that used the least energy. So in fact, it was a useful function. And this was their conclusion. Rather than being a facultative relic of the locomotion needs of our quadrupedal ancestors, now notice they've still got the evolutionary mindset in there, then they're not going to get rid of that, but they have decided that arm swinging is an integral part of the energy economy of the human gait. In other words, the human walking style. So swinging your arms is a useful function. So you can throw out the bit about quadrupedal ancestors. The science is still the same. It's a useful function. So this is what we're trying to do with our science reports, help people discern what was actually discovered and what's the story they're telling about it or they're trying to fit it into. Because quite often, in fact, every time, if you look at what they actually discovered, it fits better into the Bible than it fits into the evolutionary story. So let's move on. Another one that's considered to be a useless leftover from our quadrupedal ancestors, who were also very hairy. And when you think about it, it's an interesting conundrum. If we evolved from a creature that was covered with hair that protected it from the sun all over the body and was good for thermoregulation, why would we evolve into a creature that has no hair except on its head, and then it's got long hair that gets caught in things, and we have to wear clothes? Well, maybe that's not quite so true, right? But again, in this article that was put out quite a few years ago, but this mindset is still there. Some hair is helpful to humans. They sort of grudgingly accept. Eyebrows can keep sweat out of the eyes. And this is an interesting one. Facial hair might influence a woman's choice of sexual partner. All the rest of that hair is essentially useless. Well, that's not actually true, and we've known that for a long, long time. It's not useless. Okay. There are obvious uses for hair. Yes, it does protect the tops of our heads from the sun, particularly if you live in Australia, even though most Australians do wear hats. But anyone who has gone bald will tell you that thermoregulation, in other words, heat loss, is quite a problem. And so the hair on top of your head does have a thermoregulation function. One that you may not be aware of, well, you're aware of it, but you might not think about it, is that hair is actually a sensory receptor. If you just rub your hand along the hair on the back of your forearm, if you're not wearing long sleeves, without actually touching your skin, just touch the hairs, you can feel that, because hair follicles actually have a nerve attached to them. And the other important one is that hair follicles are involved in lubricating your skin. Now, to understand that, we need to actually look at the microscopic structure of a hair follicle. And a hair follicle is not just an anchor point for the hair shafts, which actually project out of the skin surface. They all have an oil gland attached to them. And at the bottom there, which is not illustrated in this picture, there is a nerve connection to a touch receptor. So hair follicles are very, very useful. They have a good function. But the other interesting aspect of hair follicles that's really considered a vestigial function relates to this little thing there called the erector pili muscle on the side. And that is what gives you goosebumps, which is your hair standing on your end when you are cold and stressed. Now, the standard story for this is that we evolved from a furry creature, and when it was attacked or being pursued by a predator, it could make its fur stand on end and it would look bigger and the predator would go away. Well, I don't think that actually works somehow. I think the rabbits and whatever they do still get caught and eaten. But the hair does stand on end when you are stressed and when you are cold. Well, the erector pili muscle actually has a much more subtle function than that. And here is a photo of an actual hair follicle. And you can see there is, in this photo, there's a sort of strip of muscle attaching to the oil gland. And in fact, the real function of this is to help extrude the oil onto the surface so that the skin is lubricated. And if the hair does stand on end, that does extend the range of the hairs as touch receptors, because it makes them stand up more vertical. But we need to think of, now, when do we get really extreme stresses? Well, yes, when you're cold, that is a stress. And also when you are fearful. And the reason for that is that the erector pili muscle is controlled by the autonomic nervous system. It's smooth muscle, so that when you have strong stresses, the autonomic nervous system tends to go into overdrive. And so you get these extreme reactions. So it's an extreme reaction of what is a otherwise normal function. And if we put things into the biblical history context, we need to ask ourselves this question: would human beings have been cold or stressed in the original very good world that God made? But the erector pili muscle is still there. It is a useful functioning muscle. It wasn't designed to make our hair stand on end. After all, that's not going to be much use if you're being pursued by a hungry tiger or anything like that with the size of the hairs we've got. But that muscle is there for a function. And because we are now subjected to extreme and strong stresses, yes, it does have this rather sort of quirky effect of causing goosebumps. And finally, one that some of you may have experienced with a great deal of pain is wisdom teeth, which are third molars. So in fact, they're the teeth right at the very back, and they erupt in the late teenage years to early adult years, supposedly at the time when you are growing out of childhood and gaining some wisdom. I'll leave that to the parents of late teenagers to decide whether that's actually true. But anyway, the third molars, and they are considered to be a problem because sometimes they don't grow out. And this is an X-ray of a young person where if you look along the bottom row of teeth, they haven't quite erupted yet, and sometimes they just get stuck there. The top ones have erupted, but they haven't come right down yet. Now, sometimes the ones that don't erupt then cause problems because they're stuck in the jaw and they have to be removed. What you've got here is a mismatch in the growth of the jaw and the growth of the teeth. And even the secular scientists will admit that this is actually a problem that seems to be related to the sort of diet that we eat. It's more of a problem in places where you have a softer diet. And over the last few centuries or so, as we've eaten softer foods, our jaws don't sort of quite grow as much as they should. And also there just seems to be a general degeneration. So it's an example of a downhill process. It's nothing to do with evolution. And we do need to ask the question, well, maybe some of these so-called vestigial structures are actually really degenerate structures, and they're nothing to do with where we came from, but they might be something to do about where we're going. Let's look at a few non-human ones, but we will come back to that question because it's important, and it does actually come up with some of the non-human ones. All right, whale pelvic bones, considered to be completely useless. Now, if you've been to the Natural History Museum in London, you may have seen this. It's the skeleton of a blue whale. I was very sad that they took away that dinosaur that they used to
Dippy.
have.
Dippy the Diplodocus.
Yes, that's right. Well, actually, he is back, but they haven't put him back into the main hall there. They've put him in an area by himself. So you can still go and see him, but in the main entrance, they have this blue whale. Now, somewhere in there are some whale pelvic bones, and they are considered to be the vestiges of the time when whales evolved from a four-legged creature that lived on land but decided, well, it didn't like it and wanted to go back to the sea. And you may just be able to see them, but there they are a little bit closer there. What use could bones like that be? Well, again, going back to the coccyx, bones form anchor points and stabilizers, and they can do that without being physically adjacent or, abutting another bone. They can still form a solid anchor point within a muscle, within a tendon, or within a ligament. And so They are there as part of the stabilizers for ligaments that hold the whale's pelvic bones, the whale's reproductive structures. And again, even the secular scientists accept that. It's just that never gets out into the general public. Now, what about flightless birds? Again, this Live Science article made this point. Ostriches and cassowaries, that's a picture of a cassowary, which is an Australian bird, and it's a big bird, are among several birds that have wings that are vestigial. And this was an interesting story that came about in New Scientist a few years later. They wrote an article about vestigial organs, and this was from their article, The Existence of Something as Spectacularly de trop as the ostrich wing is only a problem for those who believe in an intelligent designer. And the interesting thing about this story was the follow-up to it, right? An ostrich farmer actually replied to this article. Now, I have no idea whether he was a Christian or he wasn't, but he was speaking from his actual experience. And this is important. Your actual experience does matter. And that is the very reason that we are having an open day for this museum, because we want people to come and see things with their own eyes, touch things with their own eyes, and use their own common sense. Your own life experience and your own observations do count. And they are important. And so this ostrich farmer wrote in and said that New Scientist, he actually named the journalist who wrote it, but we won't do that, describes ostrich rings as spectacularly de trop. I have kept ostriches for 18 years and can testify otherwise. He then wrote a whole long list of the functions of ostrich wings just from his own observations. And there were quite a lot of them. Thermoregulation was one important one, particularly in a hot country like South Africa. Interesting one was stability while running, because in fact ostriches can run extremely fast and they can do right angle bends without having to slow down. And the way they do that is to use their wings. Wings have courtship and communication functions in all birds, and so the same applies to ostriches. And they also form shelter for their young. They are a useful structure. In fact, ostriches were never meant to fly. Ostrich wings are just an extreme variation of wings in a bird that was designed to have a different sort of lifestyle. And if you think about it, there are other birds in that situation. No one thinks that penguin flippers are vestigial. So wings do more than fly. We need to look at the whole animal or the whole creature. Don't look at things in isolation. Nothing in biology works on its own, nothing in isolation. God made whole functioning ecosystems and whole functioning organisms to live in them. But here is another interesting one about wings. This is a cormorant bird, which is a strong flyer, but you may have seen these birds sitting on rocks, holding their wings out to dry, as it were. It's a very distinctive pose. But even though they do that, they are good, strong flyers. But if you go to the Galapagos Islands, you'll see this rather scruffy-looking bird. And it is a genuinely flightless cormorant. This bird can't fly. It's actually a good diver, so it does survive in the Galapagos Islands, but it's stuck there. It's not going to fly away. This is a bird that has lost the ability to fly. So this is a true vestigial organ. There are such things as vestigial organs, but they have nothing to do with evolution. What they are is a loss of function. But these things are, this bird is still a cormorant. So the bird has not changed in kind. It's just lost a function. And that happens. And the same applies to another classic vestigial creature, the blind cavefish. And this was the headline in the article from live science, growing up in the wrong neighborhood. Now, what did they mean by that? What they meant was that the fish that hatched out in these completely dark caves in this region in Central America where they live started to grow eyes as the fish started to grow, started to develop in embryonic development. But then it gave up and they ended up with just a sort of membrane where their eyes ought to be. The interesting thing is there are fish of the exact same species that grow and live in light conditions and they have functioning eyes. And some scientists did some studies on these fish and they found that, in fact, the embryos, because remember, fish eggs hatch in water, they're not inside the mother fish, except for seahorses, which are inside a father fish. But these fish just hatch out in water in the river, and they need to be exposed to light to get the right sort of stimulation. Embryonic development is a whole series of steps, but have to get the right stimulation to get the next step in the sequence to develop. So growing up in the wrong neighborhood, yes, being stuck in the dark and they don't develop any eyes. But if they grow up in the light, well, they do develop eyes. So, so again, it's a degeneration. So we need to look, what is the real significance of vestigial organs? Well, the whole idea that there are some parts of our bodies that are useless is actually a testament to our ignorance. It was ignorant back in the 1890s when we didn't know what the endocrine glands did. It was ignorance that we didn't know what the appendix did or the coccyx or all of those other, or arm swinging, until somebody actually overcame that prejudice. And human curiosity does prevail, and we should be grateful for that, and their functions have been revealed. So nothing vestigial there. Functions have been revealed simply because human curiosity has overcome evolutionary prejudices. But there are some vestigial organs or some degenerate organs which are genuine loss. But again, that's not evolution. It's a reminder of biblical biology. Initially, it was very good, and we see design. So we see design in arm swinging. We see design in the way hair follicles work. We see design in the appendix. But there are some things that have gone downhill, and because the world came under the effects of sin and judgment. So lots of things like mutations, disease, natural selection, and of course death, all real processes, but none of them are evolutionary processes. The world has certainly changed, but it definitely has not evolved. And so let's leave it there. If there are any questions, Sam, that have come up during this, do we have any time to look at them?
I think we've got a few
minutes.
I think we've got a few more thank yous to do first.
Oh,
we
yes,
do.
definitely do
those come in.
those. Oh, good.
Eagle-eyed Joe is right. We do indeed have some thank yous to do. So that is one I've already done. So we've just got the one, I believe, as far as I can tell. This comes in from George Bond. Super chat, 20 Aussie buckaroos. No, Diane, facial hair evolved to cushion the punch blows when we were more aggressive in the past.
All right. Okay.
Which is it's real theory.
It's about as good as a theory as the other one. Yeah.
Yes, it's as good a theory as any of them. Yes.
Right. Okay. And this one also, this question comes in from George Bond, so I'll put this up. How do evolutionists explain the reproduction system of the seahorse?
The quick answer is they don't. Because they can't. It is a whole functioning system that seems to work. They can describe how it works,
but can't explain how they got there.
They can't explain how it got there.
I mean, if you want to go one step further back, right?
Yes.
Okay, the origin of sexual reproduction goes against the standard idea of evolution, right?
Yes, it
because
does.
asexual reproduction is something which is, far more simpler.
Far simpler. Doesn't have nearly as many complications and potential for going wrong.
For evolutionary,
That's right.
you know. So even just the
Yes.
origin of sexual
Mm.
reproduction is
Yeah.
something which is
Yes.
unexplainable by evolution. So
Yes.
to go one step
Mm.
further and have a bizarre form of sexual reproduction like the
Yes.
seahorse is just beyond anything that's really
That's
explainable.
right. Actually, we had a recent story about a seahorse reproduction that you might like to read in the fact file, which shows how brilliantly it was designed and how so many different things had to happen for it to work. Yes.
Right. Okay.
Can I just add something
Yeah,
to
go on.
that?
Yes, indeed.
Diane mentioned that the appendix has apparently evolved 32 times. Well, in a paper on seahorse reproduction, the scientists said that live birth, which they call
Yes.
viviparity, has evolved 150 times separately.
Oh,
So-
well,
so
now they have to have
Yeah,
150
150
times
times
as
more
much
faith.
faith.
Well, the miracle of birth, they call it, and yet it's evolved separately 150 times.
Well, I just
It's
got
just
we've got
ridiculous.
150 times for the birth plus 30 whatever times for the I wonder how many. I mean, it's gonna start to build up, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It's almost
Astronomical amount of
it's almost
faith
turning
needed to
into
believe in
it's almost
evolution.
turning in yeah it's almost turning into a new game show. Who wants to be a million-year heir?
How much
Yes.
faith do you have?
Let's find out.
The explanation for why seahorses get pregnant in the male is that that the female seahorse therefore has more capacity, more energy to then go and produce the next brood of eggs. And I guess my response to that is, if that is the case and it's such an evolutionary advantage, why don't all fish do it?
Yes.
Indeed. Why only seahorses?
Indeed.
So they,
Yes.
it's no explanation at all.
Yes, just because something works does not explain its origin.
All right, Sam, do we have one or two more questions before we begin to wrap
I
up?
think-
As I mentioned,
I
we're
think
going to
we
sort
can
of
We can
begin to
squeeze
wrap
in
a bit
two more, I
earlier.
think.
Yeah.
Do we have anything
this-
that's sort of relevant to what we've been discussing this evening?
Yes, we do. We do. We do
Excellent.
have one. So this one is coming from Marianne Penelope James. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. I do apologize if I
Hello,
butchered it.
Marianne.
Says, well, they've said apologies if this is if you've already covered it, and they said, but I was taught that man's body hair distribution was due to him becoming secondarily aquatic, so the exposed areas grew body hair.
Diane.
That is a theory that I have heard of, and they use the analogy that there are other mammals, because human beings are classified as mammals, that like dolphins, that have apparently lost their body hair, because the theory is that they evolved from a furry animal as
back
well.
into something.
Yes. So but there are plenty of aquatic animals, sort of particularly the ones that live on the shoreline, like seals and walruses and things like that, that have quite thick body hair. And if human beings did actually live in a sort of semi-aquatic lifestyle, they wouldn't have lived out in the ocean like a whale. They would have lived on the shoreline. It is a theory that was floated a few decades ago. I remember reading about it, but again, it's pure speculation, and it doesn't explain anything. The other thing it's meant to explain is why we also have a layer of subcutaneous fat, which is another feature that's found in aquatic animals, which they need for thermoregulation, and we use for thermoregulation as well. But just because two creatures have some similarity in structure doesn't mean they are evolved from a common ancestor, or that they acquired it by some sort of evolutionary process. The fact that it's useful in human beings and useful in aquatic animals doesn't explain anything. It's just an observation. Well, it works in both of these creatures. Therefore, it's a useful design feature, could equally explain why it's there.
Doesn't really fit with the out of Africa theory, does it?
No, it doesn't fit with the out of Africa theory,
Because
which is why the mainstream evolutionists just ignore it and consider it to be a fringy
idea.
idea.
Is if we evolved out of Africa, so we started off as very hairy apes, evolved into hairless apes, or essentially hairless apes, and out of Africa, so he's kind of spread out into all the world. And well, if one group of human beings that if you had an ethnic group of human beings that were secondary aquatic and they were a lot hairier, you could kind of make an argument, but you don't find that. It's just sort of stereotypically the same no matter where you go, so it doesn't fit with that either. But interesting. Anyway, let's have one final question, Sam, before we begin to wrap up.
Go on then, let's have this one coming in from my dad, Will J, who's coincidentally coming to the creation research tomorrow. Does the team think that the current trend of eco-warrior politics mean people are being pushed more towards creation, i.e. earth worship, as opposed to the worship of the creator?
Man worship.
Yeah, yes. Essentially, I think a better way of putting it is the current trend of people worshipping the creation rather than the creator is pushing the eco-warrior politics. I think that might mean the same thing as what you're saying there, but sort of if I was to write it down, I'd actually put it on a flip, right? The cause of eco-warrior politics is because people worship the creature rather than the creator, and as a result you get to the policies that we see in governments around the world today. But yeah, I think it's definitely something that I mean, you look at the whole premise of the eco philosophy in terms of climate change, global warming push, that kind of thing. The whole philosophy is we've messed up Earth, Mother Earth, whatever, we can fix it. We are God. It's us putting us in control of the climate. It's putting us in control of our future and our destiny. In fact, in the Fire and Ice program, we visit the glacier, which they had a funeral for, and they placed a plaque there.
I remember writing about that. Yes,
Okyokhel. They placed a plaque at Okyokhel saying that this glacier went extinct at this time, and scientists predict that in however many years all the glaciers will be destroyed. And then they finished by saying, we know what needs to be done, only you will know if we got it right, speaking to their future generations, suggesting that the future, our future, the future of climate, the future of planet Earth is in humans' hands, which is absolute nonsense. We are, of course, called to be good stewards of the world that God has given us, but the reality is it's a fallen world and it's going downhill, and the real global warming we should all be concerned about is when it's consumed with fire. And we need to make sure that we're not here when that happens.
Yes, indeed.
So that's ultimately should be our focus as Christians. It's on the gospel, essentially, not trying to save planet Earth, which is futile in the end of the day. It's going downhill and it will be consumed with fire one day.
Yes. I recently saw a stand of children's books, and it was those children's books where you can put the child's own name into the story. So the whole stand was a whole lot of different names, and each one it was the particular name, sort of whoever it was, sort of John, Ethan, Esther, or whatever, help save the planet. That was the title of the book. And it was all about being a good ecologist, about doing all of the good things for the environment. And that was helping to save the planet.
Then the planet is just groaning, as Paul says, not because, well, yes, it is because we destroyed it, but it started back with Adam, and it's been going downhill ever since. And nothing that we can do is going to stop it.
The cause is a lot more profound than the eco-warriors really understand. Yes.
Yeah.
Because our society has denied God, there's no hope. And so the only hope can be in ourselves. And some people want want mankind to be gone altogether and just let the planet go on without us. But certainly they've got to turn to some source of hope, and that can only be mankind themselves. So therefore we can control the climate.
It's a philosophy. It's a fake philosophy, a false philosophy. And I see Neil says that you don't like this world very much. Perhaps you should evolve and see if sea life suits me. I mean, if you're going to aim to evolve, mate, aim high. I want to evolve to survive on the moon. I think that'd be far better.
I think I'd like to survive in the new heavens and the new earth where there's no more curse.
Yeah. Even you get a new body as well as a bonus, so I'm looking forward to that.
I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Just can I just intervene? Just one quick thing. This has come up about the open day tomorrow from Esther. They said, so I added 2 tickets for tomorrow's open day, but was I supposed to include names? I didn't see a place to.
There should have been a place to. You should have, when you booked the tickets, it should have been as if you were buying something. Obviously, you don't buy it because it's free, but it should have been. You should have filled out your details the same as. But basically, the tickets are now closed because we are fully booked. But I believe we've got you booked in, Esther. So well, you know where to go anyway. So just come. That's fine. But all the bookings that we've had come through had a place to put in your name and your details and your address. So we could let you know what the schedule was and stuff. If your booking came through formally, you should have received an email from us earlier today with an agenda on it. If you haven't, it starts at 10:30. Turn up from 10, but obviously you know where you're going. You helped us move in here, so we look forward to seeing you.
It's so popular, Esther, you might be able to sell those tickets.
You might, yeah.
And donate the proceeds to creation research.
Absolutely. Anyway,
there we go.
Right.
All
right, I think it's time to wrap up there. We've done an hour and 40 odd minutes, and we've got to get back and get some sleep.
We have indeed. So, we've got a big day ahead of us.
Absolutely, and we want to be nice and fresh for it. There's still quite a lot that we need to do here to get organised and finished. So, God bless you all. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
And we will see you next week. I don't know what the topic is next week, but I'm assuming John will be here. You won't be here, will you, next week? Is that correct? Or will you be here next week?
Yes, I can.
You will be here.
I will be here. I just won't be. I won't
be
in this
here.
location. I will be in London, but
at some point in the
I should
future,
be able to link up
flying back to Australia. So
that's the following week.
That's the following week. Right?
Yes.
Everything's become a blur. Anyway,
it's all a blur at the moment.
Anyway, we'll see you next week. Hopefully with John. Hopefully with me if I survive tomorrow. But anyway, we shall see you.
Someone will see.
If you don't get trampled to death in the sea of people trying to get in.
Absolutely. It'll be good. Anyway, God bless everyone. We will see you later. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you next week. God bless.
Bye.
Good night.